Welcome everyone. We will be starting in just a few minutes. Welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us for today's Leadership Learning series, Managing Up. We've had a lot of interest in this topic, and I'm confident that all of you will be able to have some kind of tidbit, valuable information that we'll be able to take with you. Now, we will be taking kind of questions throughout the webinar, so if you want to go ahead and put your questions in the chat when they come up, and then kind of throughout the webinar, we'll stop and answer some questions, and then we'll have time for kind of Q&A at the end of the webinar as well. So feel free to make sure you utilize the chat. Today's webinar is presented by Lake Forest Graduate School of Management. I'm Carolyn Bruni. I'm Senior Director of Admissions. And for those of you who are not as familiar with the school, I wanted just to provide a little bit of information about Lake Forest Graduate School. We offer a hands-on practical education for working professionals who really demand more than a theory from a textbook or faculty lectures. Our students and our alumni, many who joined us today, so welcome to all of you, they really have higher expectations. They're seeking business knowledge and leadership skills that are required to make sound decisions and drive initiatives within their company and really make a positive impact. Now, our 100% business leader faculty is really a difference for us. We focus on leadership and a hands-on learning approach. We provide our students the opportunity to make an immediate impact, to take on greater roles, expand their leadership, and through that kind of cultivate their journey and build their career. And that's really one of the things we're proud of at Lake Forest Graduate School. We have some other differences that I wanted to point out. We offer graduate courses, and we are committed to developing our students' leadership skills. I think I've mentioned that previously. But in addition to learning business skills and gaining confidence beyond just current experience, our students benefit from the focus on leadership. Lake Forest provides unmatched flexibility for working professionals. Our graduate business courses meet in the evening. They meet once per week. You can join via live video conference. All of our classes are also offered online as well as face-to-face in the classroom. If you're interested in taking a specific course, you can come in and take one course. You can take a certificate, or you can enroll in the whole MBA program. So it's really kind of at your pace, and we'll meet you where you are and kind of what you're looking for. Finally, one of the most unique aspects of Lake Forest is our business leader faculty, one of which you'll be meeting in just a bit. But all of our courses are taught by 100% business leader faculty, meaning our instructors are out in the business world. They're practicing what they teach. They are CEOs, CFOs, VPs, and directors who bring the real-world practical experience into your classroom. So with that, I want to introduce our faculty presenter today, Max Reed. So Max has been on faculty here at Lake Forest since 2012. He teaches courses in strategic thinking, effective leadership, economics, and just the summer mergers and acquisitions. Max is our Senior Vice President here at Lake Forest Graduate School of our education programs. But prior to joining Lake Forest, he was a Senior VP at CDW as Head of Program Sales. He's also held leadership roles at IBM and AT&T. Max earned his BS from Northwestern and his MBA from University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. Welcome, Max. With that, I will turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn, and thank all of you who have taken time out of your day today to spend with us over the next 55 minutes or so talking about managing up. I think it is one of those topics that's critical in career development, and I am very excited to spend time today talking with you about it. I've had the pleasure, as Carolyn mentioned, of working for 3 Fortune 500 companies, and it's been a wonderful experience of the last 22 years or so of my career before changing over into higher education, and I want to spend some time really talking to you about this topic in terms of from a business perspective. One of the things that Carolyn mentioned is that here at Lake Forest, we're all business leader professionals. And so what we try to do is to take what's most important about topics, whether it be finance or mergers and acquisitions or economics or leadership, and distill it down to what you need to know so that you can have an impact tomorrow on your career. So that's the objective of this discussion in managing up, for you to walk away at the end of this discussion with something that you feel that is tangible enough that you can impact, that you can change your behavior to make sure that you create opportunities for yourself to continue to move your career forward. So I want this to be an interactive discussion. So what I'll do is at times, at some slides, I'll ask for your input, your thoughts, your feedback on some of the topic matters we're going to be covering. You can do that by posting on the chat line, and I've got Carolyn here and a few others that are monitoring the chat lines, and I would love to hear from you. As I don't know if I want to talk for straight 50 minutes. I think you guys probably have a lot to say on these topics, and we really do want to hear what you have to say. So let me start right off the bat. One of the things that I think is important is to just make sure that everyone is sort of understanding what the topic is all about and making sure that we're all on the same definition. So when you talk about managing up, I believe the definition is different. How we define managing up has changed. And I want to start with this foundation that historically the way that we thought about managing up is this, what you see on the left there with the standard org chart, that you work within your silo. And you had a direct boss and your boss had a boss and everything went up the chain of command. and that managing up meant you had to please your boss and then, of course, manage your way up through the vertical of the organization. I don't think that's the case any longer. I think in order to solve problems, it takes multiple participants from multiple disciplines. That's the box that you see in the middle there. And what ends up happening in today's environment is that instead of working within a silo, you end up working across multiple teams, where you're working with one team, let's say Team A, to solve one problem, and then you're working with Team B to solve a different problem. And it's more dynamic in terms of the people that you work with, the people that you're solving problems with, the people that you've got to lead, and people that you want to follow. That becomes more dynamic. And so we're in this different kind of environment when we talk about managing up and what it means today, because it means something fundamentally different because of the change in the way that we get things done. So let's go with that foundation. Let's start with that. And let me just hit the slides here. So let's start with managing up effectively. What does that mean? When I say effectively, I like to use that term because we're not just talking in general. What we're going to do is get down to some basic fundamental facts that we feel is essential that you need to know in order to do this to get the kind of outcome that you're looking for. So we're going to cover effective relationship building, anticipating the needs of the business, challenge conventional ideas, and being an agile leader. Now, if we had 2 hours or 3 hours, I could probably add 4 more things here that are essentially important, but for the time that we have, I thought it would be most important to cover these 4 topic areas. So let's start first with effective business relationships, how to do that in an effective way. And as we move to the next slide, and Carolyn will help you with that, we're going to talk about first what are the 5 steps to building effective relationship. The very first, and let's go to the next slide, the first 2 that we're going to cover is likability and professional respect, which is in many regards is competence. And when we talk about likability and professional respect, what we're talking about here is when you think about how we hire folks, we tend to look at their resumes, and it tells us a lot about their level of competence. But it doesn't tell us a whole lot about likability. And likability is one of those human factors that we tend to underestimate when, in fact, it is absolutely important and critical in terms of managing up. One must be competent in what they're doing as well as likable. And when we talk about likable, we've got a 2x2 here to sort of explain what we mean. And this is research done in Harvard by a professor called Amy Cuddy. And if you look at your x-axis there, it's the likability scale where the left side is low and the right side is high. And then on your y-axis, you've got competence where you've got low, and then at the top you have high. So the way that you read this is if you are an individual with very low competence or professional respect and very low likability, most people would desperately avoid you. They really don't want to be in your presence. Their experience with you is not very positive, and they tend to not want to seek you out under any circumstance. Let's say that you are very competent, you're highly competent, but you're not a very likable person. If that is how folks experience you, more than likely they interact with you for your competency, and the minute they're done with that, they mostly avoid you. They don't want to be in your presence. We see this a lot in terms of maybe, let's say, within the legal profession or the financial profession, or sometimes in IT where the behavioral skills may be challenged in terms of likability on how to connect effectively with others. And so what you tend to do is to rely on these transactional relationships that have a very difficult time persisting outside of the competency. And so that's going to create challenges for you in terms of managing up. Now let's go back down to likability. The bottom right there where you have high likability, but yet you have low competence. These are the people that are mildly wanted. We tend to want to interact with them a lot under social circumstances because they tend to be the fun people to be around. These are the folks that you enjoy spending time with at the water cooler. You always are encouraged when they want to go to the after party or the work events and things like that. But when it gets down to competency, they just lack that part, and so we tend to feel a sense of empathy for them. of concern for them. But it's always difficult for them to turn in terms of moving forward and managing up because they lack the competency that is absolutely essential to being effective. The box that you want to be in is the one in the top right, and that is you have a highly competent skill. That means others view you with professional respect. There's a certain specific skill that you bring to the team that they value. Not only that, but you also have this skill of likability. You've created this environment by which people that engage with you and interact with you tend to deem that as a positive experience. And so when you have both, this research from Harvard shows that people are far more likely to want you around them, to want you on their team. And if you're considering managing up, managers, of course, have to lead other people. And if you're lacking those likability skills and to a certain extent the competency skills, your ability to manage up is going to be very much impeded. And so let me start with a couple of questions here that I'll keep going, but as I pose the question, please post on your chat line here. Be honest, where would you put yourself or how do you see others viewing you in terms of your behavior? Do you see yourself as the lovable star, the lovable fool, the competent jerk, or the incompetent jerk? Just be honest and see where you are. And let's open up the chat line and see where you land. And we're going to talk a bit about moving across this 2x2, how to do that effectively, and why that's so important. Now, while I wait on a couple of the chats to come in, and then as they come in, Caroline will read them out, you can end up in either one of us at any time, can end up in any one of these boxes throughout the day. Because at the end of the day, we're human beings, and we have emotions, and things affect us in different ways. The key to understanding how to navigate this is to understand your emotions. Where are you at a given state in time during the day? We all have bad days. So you can start off as the lovable star at 8:30 a.m., and by the time you get to your emails at 9 a.m., you're down to the incompetent jerk because there's certain emails that have just ticked you off. That's human. The key to it is understanding how do I understand where I am at a given point in time, and then how do I make sure that I exhibit behaviors that will put me more towards the lovable star in terms of how people experience me. So I'll just stop for a second and see if there are any chats if Carol wants to read those out.
Yeah. So we have someone with high competence but middle on likability. We have somebody else who feels that they're a competent jerk, but they used to be a lovable star. Probably, and then somebody else who feels like probably a competent jerk sometimes, but would like to be more likable with their coworkers. One whose competence really depends on their amount of caffeine that they're taking in and the situation. Another person seems to think they're usually likable, but wondering if you have tips on how to convey the confidence piece of it. So looks like we're kind of all over here.
Sure. So thank you, everyone, for the feedback. That's really great, and I appreciate the honesty because in honesty and being transparent, others get to learn from your transparency. So here, again, throughout the day, we can end up in either one of these boxes. I know myself, this is something that I struggle with. No one is perfect. However, the key in the learning here is to recognize where you are and try to better understand how do you move the scale depending on where you are. So when we talk about likability, we're not talking about trying to make friends of everyone on the planet. That's not the point. Likability is about understanding how to get the best out of others, to make others feel valued, to make others feel listened to make others feel respected, to make others feel like, you agree, but maybe you disagree. And we'll talk about agreeable versus disagreeable later. All of those sort of behaviors, but those are the kind of behaviors that, although you're dealing with a challenging situation, which we all do all day long, you're still exhibiting behaviors that people enjoy being within your presence. And all of those attributes that I described before, if you sort of measure yourself throughout the day in terms of how you're exhibiting those behaviors and communicating those to others, you'll find yourself staying within that high lovable, high competence box. Now, someone posted a question related to competence. And here at Lake Forest, we talk a lot about competence because it's really about starting out as an apprentice. in any skill that you're trying to build. No one is born an expert, so we all must start as an apprentice. I had to start as an apprentice in many parts of my career. I was able to be successful because I got a lot of feedback, I got a lot of mentorship and a lot of coaching. And so starting with that belief that you're starting as an apprentice and you're seeking feedback, you're seeking partnerships to grow, you're seeking opportunities to extend your skill sets, all of those things will drive your competency from low to high. If you believe that you are highly competent and you know most all that you need to know, then if that is the case, you may see yourself as being high competence, but others may actually experience you as being very low competence, because you've got to be in a perpetual mode of learning. So hopefully those responses can help with some of the questions that have come up. Are there any additional questions that came up?
So there's some people who feel that they're competent, but they don't know. I mean, they feel that they're competent, but they don't know if other people see them as competent. And then someone was looking for advice on how do you deal with people in the different quadrants.
Oh, all great questions. Yeah. So the best way to find out about competence is to request feedback from people that you trust. Oftentimes we shy away from feedback for two reasons. One, we've got this theory called the looking glass self, that if it does not agree with who we think we are, we tend to discount the feedback. And then secondarily, there's the trust factor related to feedback. Most of us that receive feedback, generally we're receiving it from people that we actually don't trust. And so if you're receiving feedback from people that you really don't trust, you're not likely to accept the feedback into your behavioral change. So I would suggest that you focus on finding people that you trust, that know you well, and then seek their feedback. And then also be willing to take the feedback in a way that sort of assumes that people have good intentions. They're trying to make you better. And the people that love us the most, the people that we respect, the people that we would trust, they're going to tell us some things that we really need to hear, and it's incumbent upon us to listen. Okay? And then just shortly, and then we'll move on here about how to deal with people in these different boxes. I would suggest the best way to do it is to be open and honest with feedback. Provide them feedback about how their behaviors are helping others or discouraging others to deal with them. We all want feedback. We all seek it out. Of course, it's always good to provide it to people that are willing to listen to it, and that can help them along their way. And it's our responsibility as business leaders to do that. So I hope this one is really burned into your mind, these first two, because they're critically important when you talk about managing up, understanding where you are in terms of competence and likability. And we clarify that likability is not trying to be the most popular. It's not a popularity contest. It's how people experience you, and you want that to be a positive experience regardless of how difficult the situation is. So let's go to the third of the five in terms of building effective relationships. The third is about the whole person, admiring the whole person. And oftentimes when we interact at work, there used to be this theory about work-life balance, meaning that I had my work and then I had my life, and those things were two completely separate things. When I get off at 5 o'clock, I leave work at work, and I'm at home, and that's it. But as I mentioned before about the changing nature of how things are getting done, people are expecting now for their work environment to feel a lot like their family environment. That is a shift in expectations. We no longer find it acceptable to come into a job, sit in our workspace from 9 to 5, punch a clock and check out. That was industrial age thinking when we were basically a manufacturing-led economy. In today's economy, where it's all about problem solving, this sort of divide between work and life is turned from this black line to 1,000 shades of gray. And so because that expectation has changed, that people want their work life to feel like their regular life, that has an impact in terms of how you manage up. And so what we bring to work is sort of this piece of it, this small piece of who we are. And that's what we call the iceberg theory. But the question becomes, how do you manage up when all you're showing the people around you is just a piece of who you are? And I'm going to pose a question out there, and I'd appreciate some chat from you guys on this question. And the question is, what percentage of yourself do you believe you honestly bring to work every day that your coworkers are familiar with? Now, I'll say it again. What percentage of yourself do you actually bring to work that your coworkers actually get to experience? And I'll have Carolyn to read some numbers out here.
So far we have 65%, 80%, 75%, 60%, 75, a lot of 75, 70. Yeah, it looks like most people are between 75 and 60 and 75, but we have a few of 40, a few of 50, 80%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that.
And 20%?
Yeah, these are really good numbers. And so what that is reflecting is, yes, we are still holding back a piece of self away from work that I think when you think about managing up, it's in terms of effective relationship building, it's going to be very difficult to build effective relationships if all people see are half of who you really are. And so if we can go ahead and click to the next slide there, when you think about who we really are, it looks more like this. It's the whole iceberg. That is the other percentage of yourself that you don't bring to your work environment that I think when you think about managing up and you're trying to understand the whole person as business leaders, when we've got to make tough decisions about talent, we've got to make tough decisions about leadership and who are the right person to lead teams, we need to know the whole person. We need to know who you are. Because under that iceberg, there can be a lot of areas of opportunity that you have there that once put into a leadership position, those opportunities can bubble up and cause friction. And so it's better to show yourself now so that you can gain those skills that you need in order to lead effectively later. And so this is what we call lowering the waterline of self. There's a certain amount of vulnerability there that we're all uncomfortable with, right? Because we're showing so much of our cards. Now, I totally understand that there are parts of you that you want to keep private. Trust me, I get all of that. You know, the whole TMI and all of that, I get that. But that's not what I'm referring to. What I'm referring to is the person that you are holistically. Allow that person to come to work, share what is unique about you, share it to the world, give it to the world, and then accept feedback, and it helps you to grow stronger because ultimately once you're leading those teams, as many of you are, they're going to need to know who you are. They're going to need to learn how to trust you. And you're going to need to know where your coping skills, where you're going to have to build coping skills around your personality traits to ensure that some of the things that we're going to talk about later about leadership derailers don't hinder your ability to manage teams effectively. So I'm going to have Carolyn to read out some chat checks. We've got some folks that want to have a question to say.
A person has a question. If when you're looking at the whole person, if you have someone that has a disability that works at your company, but that disability is not maybe externally visible, maybe like a medical condition or an illness, how can other employees admire the whole person if they don't mention that disability? So people who are not legally required to take on the disability or mention it visually, this person's just kind of wondering, how do you kind of manage with that?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and there's a whole lot in there. And I can tell you from experience that I've had quite a few people in different organizations that were disabled. Some openly expressed some of the disabilities. Some felt like they wanted to keep it private. Those who had openly expressed the disabilities gave me the ability to better understand how I can meet their needs because I was aware of them. Those who I had no idea what the disabilities are, there were areas of friction that I was unaware of because I was not aware of the disabilities. And so I say it is a personal choice in terms of what you want your leadership to understand about you. But know that the more that they know, the more that they're able to help to bring out your strengths, the more they're able to help develop you, because ultimately that's their responsibility as a leader to make you better than who you are today. And so it's about making sure that they've got the right tools to be the most effective, and that's got to be a personal choice for you as to whether or not you want to do that. But I've always encouraged those within my organization and others that if I know it, then I can definitely be a better benefit to you. If you want to keep that private, I'm totally fine with that as well. But areas where I may not meet up to your standard, you're going to have to help me understand how I can do that better. Okay, so we're going to move forward here. On the next slide, which really references the previous slide, and that's number 4, and that is connectivity. This is a busy slide, but I'll get to it in short. This is some research by Harvard that shows how critically important it is for you to have what's called connective tissue. So the connective tissue is who do you interact with and what level of the relationship do you have with different people throughout the business. And so in referencing back that foundation that we talked about, how things have shifted, where you're no longer in siloed organizations where you're trying to manage up vertically, that you're working within different teams, and that those teams are very dynamic, they're very interactive, they're changing often. How we define leadership has changed, and this idea around connectivity has become critically important because you've got to know how to connect with not only different people, but different people in different parts of the organization. And so what this is reflecting sort of aesthetically is that if you're on the left side and you've got this sort of energy to engage, that energy, that engagement, and that exploration, those are the three attributes that tend to create the sort of networked matrix connectivity and relationships that you need in order to manage up. Oftentimes when you're sitting in these HR meetings, you're talking about succession planning, you're talking about who are the next business leaders, and let's say you put out a name. Let's say, Amy I think Amy is the right person for the role. Surely if you're following this connectivity model, other folks are going to speak up and say, I've had the opportunity of working with Amy. I've gotten a lot of feedback about Amy, and it's been very positive. I think Amy would be great for that job, and my team would love working with Amy in that position. And that's a person that's not even within your siloed organization. They're coming from a different part of the business. That's where that mesh is critically important. And so the fourth here is connectivity. You've got to have the energy, the engagement, and the exploration. You've got to be able to and willing to connect with others outside of your direct silo. You've got to be willing to engage them at a much deeper level. As we were talking about understanding where you're competent, understanding your likability factor, being comfortable with lowering the waterline so that you can better engage, and then getting out and making those connective nodes, that connective tissue, not only within your siloed organization, but throughout the organization. This is the fourth pillar of what's going to help you to build effective relationships to manage up. And then we'll go to the fifth one here, which is I'll take a pause and let you guys read this. It's one of my favorite quotes from Thomas Edison. And I'll pause just for 1 second. I appreciate persistence in those who are trying to manage up because we're all very busy, and managing up takes time. And that is the one critical thing that we are all short of. And so one has to be persistent. One of the chats that always come up through these discussions are about how do I connect with senior business leaders when I'm not within that organization, or how do I build relationships with people that I don't see that often. Well, you've got to be persistent. Every opportunity that you get, and they take 5 years in certain cases to connect with others, but you've got to keep at it. You've got to find ways to connect with other people, and you may just find an opportunity to meet with a business leader today, and then you may not see them for another year or so, but then you can remind them of the time that you guys have met before, but you want to have your list of people that you want to network with, that you want to connect with, that you want to try to build relationships with, and oftentimes we make false assumptions about where that person is a senior business leader. Why would they spend 5 minutes with me? Why would they take time out of their day to do that? One of the assignments that we have in the MBA leadership program is to ask business leaders 10 questions that you think they wouldn't answer. And we ask students all the time, of those 10 questions, how many of those do you think will actually get answered? And they'll say something to the effect of 20%, 30% at best, only to find out that the average is about 80%. So you make these assumptions about people don't want to meet you, people don't want to get to know you. Most business leaders are curious all the time and are interested in meeting people, because what we do as business leaders, it's all about people and not much else. So I would encourage you to be persistent, take time building those relationships, find ways to make it work. If you stay on top of it, I can guarantee you're going to get some yield as long as you keep at it. So those are the 5 ways to build effective relationships. We're going to continue on through the agenda and getting to the second one of managing up effectively, and that is anticipating the needs of the business. Now, this is going to be a bit broader here in terms of business leaders like those who understand the business at a much broader level than the position that they occupy. And so if we want to go to the next slide, what we mean by that in terms of anticipating the needs of the business, it's going to require knowledge of 2 things: market awareness and business unit awareness. And market awareness, and you can read those there. I won't spend too much time reading from the slide. But it's understanding what is happening in the market that you're participating in. So let's say, for example, here at Allstate, you're in the insurance business, and your CEO has talked often about the importance of data analytics, data-driven decisions, using data to better understand the business. All of those things are understanding what's going on in the insurance market and how things are fundamentally changing. Some of the innovations that are coming up, all driven around AI and technology. All of those things are important for you to know in terms of being able to anticipate the needs of the business and where the business is going. And then you have to understand, okay, what role is my business unit playing in the overall strategy of the company? How are we helping the company move forward in its initiatives? What role do we play in that? Because every person on the Allstate team, regardless of where you are, every single person from the CEO all the way down to the custodian play a very critical role in the success of Allstate. And the value that you bring to the market, that value that you bring to your customer, it is a result of every single member on that team executing on their roles and responsibilities. And so you got to understand what role your business unit plays into that overall strategy, and then understanding how the business leaders that you work with, what do they do to drive that value? What areas do they perform in order to drive that value? And then you've got to think about, well, how do I help to meet those needs? Everyone wants team players on their team that understands the challenges that they're dealing with. And they tend to seek those out who they feel have a much broader knowledge about some of the challenges that they deal with. And so I would encourage all of you, regardless of where you're sitting in the organization, doesn't matter from the CEO all the way down to the custodian, to be aware of these two factors: what's going on in the market with Allstate and all of its competitors and the industry at large, and then within the business unit that you occupy, what role does it play, and then how can you participate in that in a way that supports your leadership team so they can remain effective. And so we'll move on here to so that we can keep pace here. The third one here is managing it effectively, is challenge conventional ideas. This is an area that is a big part of our leadership program, challenging conventional ideas. This is important because this is absolutely critical to all companies, regardless of where you are in a free market. And I'll go to the next slide here to talk about what happens with conventional thinking. Conventional thinking, in short, it absolutely kills companies. And so the data that I'm showing here, and this is going to be interesting, it's showing the lifespan of companies, the average lifespan of companies in the S&P 500. So it's from 1965, forecasted all the way out to 2030. And if you were to regress against this data, what you would see is that it's negatively sloping, meaning that the lifespan of companies are shrinking. It's now down to a rolling 7-year average, which is really extraordinary because we're so used to, in the American economy, having these big companies that have been around for 100 years, like GE and AT&T and those kind of companies, Boeing. But in the new market economy, companies are not lasting that long anymore. As a matter of fact, the rolling average here is 7 years. And what that is telling you is that the pace of change is speeding up rapidly. It's extraordinarily fast. And what I'll ask is anyone surprised by this data? And we'll monitor the chat. Are you surprised by the average lifespan of companies is getting much smaller, much faster in this new economy? And as those things start to roll up, I'll have Carolyn to read a few of them.
Not surprised, but I wonder what are all the factors that impact this?
Yes.
And somebody else is not surprised. Not surprised due to the technology innovation in all the different industries.
Mm-hmm.
Technology they see as a big factor in all the kind of quick changing. It makes sense given the change in the advancement of technology. So it looks like everybody's kind of looking at machine learning and technology as really driving this change. And also the inability for organizations to change effectively and quickly. Not surprised, look at Amazon, constant change in the market.
Yeah, all wonderful comments. So thank you very much. I love this. We're very interactive. We've got over 202 people online here, and we're able to be interactive. So you got a couple more, Carol?
Yeah, how does employee turnover impact these numbers? And the changing demographics and the adoption of change needs. So they're looking at kind of what does it mean for like employee turnover?
Yeah, I think, there's one that came up that I want to address in terms of the drivers of change. I think it has a lot to do with technology. It has a lot to do with access to information globally. So there are more players in the marketplace. There's more brain power. There's more talent. And this is a great segue into the question of what does it mean for company turnover. I think it's very positive in the sense that it is creating new opportunities for all of us. The economy has been growing for 10 straight years, which means the job market is growing. And so because we've got this dynamic change happening, it's creating more opportunities than it's actually destroying, which is really good because we've been able to adjust effectively to what's happening in the marketplace. Now I want to move to the next slide, and I think this slide represents effectively the pace of change that is happening in the economy. And what it's going to show here is the time that it took to reach 50 million users when we had the telephone took 75 years for the telephone to reach 50 million users. With the radio, it took 38 years, and with TV, it took 13 years to reach 50 million users. With Internet Explorer, 4 years, Twitter, 9 months, and when Pokemon came out, it took 19 days to reach 50 million plus users. I like this slide because it gives you a really high-level example in the most simplistic form of how fast things are changing, how easy it is to access information, access millions of people. And so when we get back to that fourth pillar of managing up effectively, this is why it's important that business leaders need those who are willing to challenge conventional ideas. You cannot do the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different result. Of course, I'm sure you guys are familiar with that quote from Einstein. And markets simply won't allow it. Either you find ways to innovate or the market will basically cannibalize you. That's the nature of free markets. And so Allstate, just like many other companies, they need you as business leaders to challenge conventional thinking, challenge ideas. We're no longer in the environment where all of the answers are going to come from the top down. As a matter of fact, it's actually inverted where the answers are going to come from the bottom up. Those who are closest to the customer will be the most effective at solving the problems because the problems change so fast. And so when we talk about challenge conventional ideas in terms of managing up, leaders are looking for those who are willing to do that, who are willing to be courageous to do that. But again, the importance of the MBA is to help you to understand how to do that in an effective and constructive way. I think there is a fundamental difference between disagreeing and opening and challenging ideas and debating and then being disagreeable. And let's move to the next slide. This is where when we talk about in the MBA program why it's important to educate yourself, because you want to be a part of these discussions. You want to be a part of the debate. And so here's a question that I wanted to put out to you guys, but it looks like the answers are on there. But the question that we were going to ask is, what's the difference between disagreeing and being disagreeable? And in short, when you're disagreeing, it's all about the problem. And at the end of the day, Allstate needs you to solve problems. And so as long as the discussion is centered on the problem, you're merely disagreeing and having a very rigorous and robust debate. But when the discussion dissolves into the personal, then at that point, you're no longer disagreeing, you're being disagreeable. And so when we get back to those skills that are absolutely essentially important that you learn in the graduate program, this is the likability factor this is a great example of when we talk about the likability factor. You find that people that are highly competent but don't possess the necessary leadership skills or have not gone through the Lake Forest Leadership Graduate Program, they tend to devolve from the problem to the person. And once you do that, the likability scale drops tremendously. And so we want to encourage you to challenge ideas when you talk about managing up. But what you'll learn in the graduate program is that how to remain focused on the problem and not the person. And so I'll cover this last one. We're going to get to the final one here on number 5. on being an number 4 on being an agile leader, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. And so I know you've heard a lot about leadership agility. We've got a long relationship with Allstate. We've done several programs. Our Center for Learning organization has done several programs in the Emerging Leadership Program, and we've talked about leadership agility quite a bit. But I want to start in short with some writings from one of my favorite leaders, which I think is absolutely apropos for this discussion, Charles Darwin. And let's go to the next slide here. And so the next slide here is a quote from Charles Darwin, if you want to go to that. And I'll give you an opportunity to just pause and read it. So what Charles Darwin is talking about, Darwin was a naturalist, and he went out and just sort of studied how species survive in the natural world. And I often, in the economics class, I often talk a lot about free markets are more like, I would say, the jungle, if you will, right? Those who adapt the quickest are the ones that tend to survive. There are a lot of smart people out there. There are a lot of smart companies out there. But what happens, as I showed you that other slide before, that you're starting to see the life expectancy of these companies start to shrink down to 7 years, it's not because they didn't have smart people. It's not because they weren't intelligent or they didn't have size. It had everything to do with their ability to adapt and change. And so for all of the folks that are on this call, Allstate and other companies as well that are participating on this call, it's really about adaptability. And so if I'm a business leader and I am looking for leaders who can help me run an organization effectively, then absolutely I'm looking for agile leaders. Those who are willing to challenge conventional ideas, those who are willing to expand my thinking on how to get things done, those who are willing to be agile and be able to adjust to change in an effective way that is constructive to what it is that we're trying to accomplish, that is absolutely essential to the nature of the business. The economy now has gotten so efficient and so effective that surprisingly enough, it matters less about the products and services that you bring to market and more about your ability to adjust to the change in the marketplace. Very few things now are not commoditized to a certain extent. And if it's not commoditized, meaning that you've got differentiation, then it doesn't take a whole lot of time to copy what you're doing. And so survivability now is less about the difference in the product or the difference in the service and more about when something changes in the marketplace, how fast is your team able to adapt and how often will they get it more right than wrong? Because no one's going to get it perfectly right, but how often will they get it more right than wrong? That becomes the essential factors by which companies will thrive. And so being an agile leader is absolutely critical in terms of managing up, because that's what business leaders are looking for. And so I'll stop there and just do a really quick review and talk about that we covered effective relationship building, where we talked a lot about competency and talked about likability. We also talked about anticipating the needs of the business, and that's understanding the market, what's happening in the marketplace, as well as your business unit, and being able to speak to business leaders effectively about that. We often talk about the elevator speech. If I'm sitting in an elevator, if I should get called in the elevator with CEO of my company, whichever company that is, they ask me a general question about something, I should be able to speak intelligently, not only about the market, but what role my business unit plays in terms of executing that strategy. So we covered that. We also talked about challenging conventional ideas, how to be constructively disagreeable. How to constructively disagree without being disagreeable, and that plays again back into that likability factor that is so critically important when you talk about managing up. And then we talked about being an agile leader, why that is so critically important. At the end of the day, in free markets, information is so readily available, transaction cost is so low, innovation is so high that at the end of the day, what's going to help your company to survive is your ability to adapt, not necessarily your differentiation. So I'm sure that was quite a bit of information for the 47 minutes that we've been having this discussion. I want to say thank you to everyone who has participated so far. I'll have Carolyn to read a couple of chats here. Let's go ahead and open it for Q&A. We'll try to get some of your questions answered before we close out here shortly.
Yeah, there's a couple questions that we didn't get to that were in there earlier. One, when we were talking about kind of sharing your wholesale, there was a question about how do you understand where that filter is between sharing enough and sharing too much?
Yeah, so we tend to refer to that as the TMI filter. And it has a lot to do with the culture of the organization that you're working in. Some organizations are very conservative, and that's fine. Excuse me, and that's fine. And you've got to make a judgment call about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. Some cultures are not as conservative. Some cultures are very liberal, and certain behaviors are a little bit more acceptable. And so you've got to make a judgment call about the culture of the organization that you're working in and how your level of comfortability fits with the culture of that organization. Not everyone is comfortable with sharing a lot about their lives. But if you're in a culture where that is expected, and you can understand why others will experience you as being closed off, they would experience you as being suspect, they would experience you as being not a part of the team, if you will. So there's a lot of negative things that come along with that. But if that doesn't fit you, then it's a very good idea for you to get to a conservative culture where that is actually respected and you can thrive. So my answer to that in short is it has a lot to do with the culture, and make sure that your level of comfortability aligns to the culture that you're participating in, because if there's a misalignment, there could be some negative perceptions in terms of likability coming out of that for you.
There's another question here I'm sure a lot of people have is, what's the best way to manage someone who's kind of a disagreeable person in a discussion, if they're kind of taking over a discussion or debate, especially if that person is in a leadership position?
Sure. That's always hard, trying to manage your leaders. I think most leaders are open to feedback, so I would encourage you to provide feedback or ask those business leaders that behave in that way, are you interested in feedback? And hopefully the answer is yes, because if they aren't interested in feedback, then more than likely they've created a culture that's going to be very difficult for you to excel in. And you can sort of make a judgment call on what you want to do after that, but if they're a business leader that is not willing to accept feedback, that's going to be very difficult for you to thrive in that kind of culture, because I'm sure they're creating an environment by which others probably feel the same way. So assuming that they are good business leaders and they're open to feedback, providing that feedback can be extremely helpful to that business leader to help them to grow.
And what's the role of self-promotion in all of this?
Yes, that's a great question in terms of self-promotion. I've always believed self-promotion is good when it's measured, when it's balanced. So there is some research that MIT has done around what they call self-promotion and ambition, where too much of ambition actually works against you, as well as too less ambition actually works against you. So when you lack ambition, people tend to interpret or experience you as being lazy, as being not connected, as being not a team player. When you have too much ambition or too much self-promotion, then the interesting thing about human behavior is that people actually work towards your demise. So over self-promotion, providing too much credit to yourself and not to others, people tend to interpret you as selfish, self-serving, and surprisingly enough, the research has shown that over time, if you persist with that behavior after being provided feedback, then people will actually work against you, which is pretty astonishing. But that's the natural human behavior. So it's about finding the right balance with ambition and self-promoting.
I think that's most of the questions that we have. So, and I know it looks like we want to be cognizant of your time and respectful of that. So with that, I want to thank Max. I hope that all of you enjoyed what you've learned today. I noticed a lot of people asked, are these slides going to be available, or is this presentation going to be available? The answer to both of those is definitely yes. When you click out of the webinar today, you'll be served up an area where you can go in and actually ask to receive the slides. We'll be more than happy to send those out to you. If you're an alum or a student and you would like to become more involved, we do have ways to do that. You can become a Lake Forest ambassador. You can certainly raise your hand there. If you're prospective, you'd like to learn more and kind of experience more about the program, there's places there too to register for an upcoming open house we have on August 5th where you can actually sit in a class. We have a financing webinar if you want to learn more about kind of the financing piece. So there's a lot of different ways to learn. Our next term begins in the fall, August 26th. It's not too late to get started there. So like I said, you can register or schedule for all of these events on the questionnaire that will pop up when you close the window. We thank you for joining us today. Our next Leadership Learning webinar will take place in September. So watch your emails. We'll be sending you more information and details on the topic and the time. So thanks again, and thanks, Max.
Okay. Thank you all for spending time with us. We greatly appreciate it.
Laura, she's somebody who's going to hopefully come in. She's Tamika's friend. I think when it comes to being able to adapt to your communication style, speak to other people that are versatile and flexible, basically saying that you can take on anything. So be flexible and say you can take on anything. People, we were at the highest at 204. Most people stayed on for the whole time, so that's really good. That was very positive. I thought it was very positive. I'm sure I actually didn't realize you thought it was Allstate, I guess, because we were sitting at Allstate. The first time you said it, I thought you were just using that as an example. But I think that went really well. So given all the comments about the whole technical piece, I mean, obviously I got to really get honed in on the topic for September, but I think people will really be interested in that.
Good.
So what did you think?
It seemed like it went okay.
Yeah, I mean, prior to this, we got well over 40-some inquiries from it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's a great way for us now. They're all kind of over the board, right, how interested they are, but that's how we'll just start kind of working with them.
Yeah.
So the woman who said 20%, that's one of the, that's Laura Amasari, who's Tanika's friend, who's planning on coming in the fall. I don't know where she's going in from that. I mean, she's just such a, I don't know, she's getting married. I don't know if she's such a private person. I don't know. So I talked to Roger, and he said that yesterday Jeff came in and talked to him about basically, how Roger put it, told Roger, like, basically how he was going to feel about it. Asked him how he felt, and then proceeded to tell him how he was going to feel about it. And he said such a thing to Rob later. And then
I'm sure that's probably what happened. Yeah.
That's exactly what Roger told me.
Yeah.
And then he said that Jeff, and then Roger asked me, are we replacing Jenzabar? Because we really can't. He said we were going to replace it in a year. He said it would take way, like that.
That's like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Were there meetings on replacing Jenzabar? Like,
no.
Where did that come from?
But anyway, that was Roger's.
Yeah. So we're going to take a few weeks, do a full analysis on the two that Jeff mentioned in the context of the criteria that we set, and then we'll figure out where it fits. We'll give it equal weight. And then depending on the results of that, if there isn't anything else, we surely like to move forward.
So, because those aren't CRMs, is that just for it to replace the PARDOC? Because what would be your CRM?
Well, that's the question. So you've got a criteria that includes on that table, that includes all of the things you need, CRM and marketing tool. It's all in there. And so if those things don't meet that criteria, then...
Yeah, because they're not the CRM, that's the Salesforce piece. So the problem with Jenzabar, and a lot of those, like when I was looking at those, is they don't speak back and forth. You'd have to maybe download every night, or
So I'm totally okay with those outcomes. That's what it is. But it doesn't meet what we're looking for.
Okay, I will give you this so you have it. So when I don't share my screen, you can't forward on this. And if I share my screen, then everybody can see all the like how many people are on and all the notes, so that's why I just upload it, but that's why you have to change over here.
Okay.
So it's a little bit,
Different.
it's different, it's not as, handy, but I think it's better than everybody's